No member of the military could oppose democracy, and the army has never been against religion. After decades of deep involvement in politics, the chief of the Turkish army has suggested there's a silent reform going on inside the Turkish army. But can a Turkish civilian government really control its own military? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome, I'm Imran Garda. Known for his tough line on upholding the secular Turkish state, General İlker Başbuğ, the Turkish Chief of Staff, is widely seen as anti-Islamist. But at a time when Turkish politicians have failed to remove the army from internal affairs, he seems to have voluntarily done the job on their behalf. His statements last week caused a stir in both political and military circles, as Mohammed Shokair explains.
He is the first Turkish chief of staff who walks the streets and talks to the people, talking to Kurds through a translator, recognizing their cultural rights and respecting their language. Last week, he surprised journalists by removing all army restrictions and taboos. He answered all of their questions, even the political ones, that have always been taboo in the eyes of military men. The biggest surprise came when he announced the army would expel any person who advocates a military coup.
The army is committed to the democratic system in Turkey and will not allow anyone thinking about or planning a military coup to remain in the army for 1 minute.
A great assurance to politicians, especially the current government, after General Başbuğ's pledge to give full cooperation in the current interrogations of army officers accused of planning this kind of action. His attitude of change even touched on Turkish foreign policy. When asked about the Israeli defense minister's concern over the first Turkish-Syrian military maneuvers, he was defiant.
I'm not concerned about what the Israelis say. These are limited maneuvers with a neighboring country. They are important because it was the first time we carry out joint exercises with the Syrian army. But we will not ask anyone permission before carrying our joint maneuvers with our neighbors.
General Başbuğ has recently called for reforming the relations between the army and the Islamist politicians. He says the army is not in confrontation with Islam or religious people, because the army is a part of the Turkish Muslim population.
We are facing a radical shift in the army's mindset. The Chief of Staff has personally made it clear.
The Turkish Army Chief of Staff admitted that the army's policies cannot change easily, but his latest approach to the media and his attitude towards the public may indicate that there is a silent reform going on inside the Turkish army. And it is, after all, the institution that has always played a significant role in Turkey's political future. Mohammed Shokair for Inside Story.
Well, joining us today are our guests in Ankara, Yusuf Kanlı, a political analyst for Hurriyet Daily News. In Istanbul, Kareem Bulgur, a columnist at today's Zaman newspaper. And in London, Fadi Hakura, a Turkish affairs expert in the European programme at Chatham House. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Mr. Bulgur, if I could start off with you, isn't this just a case of sweet words from the general for the country's EU hopes?
Well, actually, you're right. I was listening to Mohammed Shokair's Inside Story, and I felt myself saying how I would love to believe in this story. The Chief of General Staff is doing this for the second time. He has a very quiet democratic voice and tone of speaking to the press. He has actually changed some of the accreditation standards, principles of the army. He's speaking to the religious newspapers also, not to all of them, but some of them. But in my idea, we have all the rights to be skeptical about the aims and agenda of the army. I believe that the upper echelons of the army are moderate people. They are ready to cooperate with the civilian society and civil politics, but there are thousands of officers who are educated into the old mentality of the army. In that sense, maybe these press conferences of the Army Chief of Staff will work to appeal to those people and say them, you know, get ready to be more democratic. But this is only a beginning. Let me say, we are only scratching at the beginning of this democratization process.
Okay.
And the fact that the Army Chief of Staff is speaking all these reform issues, political issues, even international political issues in front of the public, and all those press meetings are actually broadcasted alive in almost all the television channels in Turkey. Well, I don't like this.
Well, let's pose this to Yusuf Kanlı. Is most of this just public relations from the army?
Yes, let me first underline how much I appreciated the last few remarks of Mr. Bulgur. Of course, having the military commander of the country commenting on domestic politics, foreign relations, on relations between the government and the society and such, in a democratic society is, of course, incompatible with the notion of democracy. We have to underline that. However, we have to underline as well that Turkey is the only democracy in the Muslim society that managed to survive 85, 86 years. This is partly because of secularism principle and the ardent support of the military for the defense of the secularism principle. Because without secularism, we cannot sustain a democratic regime in this country.
Mr. Kanlı, you know,
we have a dilemma here.
Sorry to interrupt you. A couple of years ago, we filmed a documentary on your nation, and we spoke to a retired General Oktar Ataman, and he gave us an analogy. He gave us a very interesting analogy. He said that he had bought his son a train set, and every time his son's train went off the rails, he would go and help his son and put it back onto the rails. And he said that's the same for Turkey. Every time Turkey goes off the rails, the military steps in and puts it back onto the democratic lines. It was quite patronizing, I would think. Don't you think that mentality is gone?
I would think as well. I would think the same. I would think the same. You know, we have suffered a lot from military takeovers, intervention in politics, and we couldn't somehow complete the normal process of democracy through the problems we face. We have to be against all kinds of interventions and pressures coming from military or from civilian underground organizations, including the Islamic sects in this country. We have to be opposing all these power sources in the country.
Okay, so let's pose this to Fadi Hakura.
Each time they intervene.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let's pose this to Fadi Hakura. Is there a fear that the army is the only check on the government, particularly this Islamist-leaning AK Party-led government? And if the army falls under the wing of this government, then the government has lost its only sort of checks and balances?
Traditionally, the army has been seen in Turkish society as the insurance policy for the democratic, secular system in Turkey. But I think now that is changing. And it's not only with the current Chief of Staff, General İlker Başbuğ. I think there has been a pattern of the last 5, maybe more years, where the power has been shifting away from the military towards the civilian authorities. I think what General Başbuğ was saying was a coded, indirect way that the military now is adapting to new circumstances. And the principal reason why this is happening, in my view, is that Turkish public opinion is changing. Turkish society is becoming far more diverse. It's becoming many more shades of gray. The Turkish public increasingly does not want to see military coups, is more in favor of democratic politics. But crucially also, the Turkish public increasingly does not want to see any group try to dominate its views on the country, whether Islamist, nationalist, military, or secularist, or any other group. And one should see that in the context of Turkey is becoming a more global society. It's joining with the global economy, more urbanization, and also, albeit these days not a very strong force, the EU accession process is also a factor. So Turkish society is changing, and the Turkish military is adapting to the changes in society.
Yeah, let's just focus on the military. Turkey's military is one of the largest in the world, and for a long time it has played a dual role in the country, having a significant impact on its politics. Just in the last 50 years, Turkey has had 4 military coups. The first was in 1960. Officers seized control, frustrated by an ineffective and corrupt government. Some cabinet members were executed. The country returned to civilian control after a year. 9 years later, the army forced the prime minister to resign amid civil unrest. 3 years of street battles between the communists and ultra-nationalists had brought the country to its knees. The military helped set up a new coalition cabinet from all parties. Almost a decade later, the army stepped in again amid deep political chaos. It suspended the government and banned all political parties. The military assumed full control that time for 3 years. The latest coup in 1997 was of a different sort. It was called postmodern. Generals asked Turkey's first Islamist prime minister to resign, which he did. So we've looked at the history of the coups. Mr. Bulgur, there's been a coup threat from elements within the military very recently. The Ergenekon investigation. How big has this threat been?
Well, we don't know if the threat was really big, but they were preparing for something really big. Ergenekon was not a military organization. Let me first underline this. This was a coalition of some ex-army generals, some military officers still on duty, but mainly civilian people who wanted the military intervene once more and to take Turkey into its old establishment regime, let me say, which is dominantly secular, not really democratic, but not certainly civilian. These people wanted to destabilize the country through, I don't know, murders and street fights. They were not planning to make a military coup on their own. They were just planning to prepare the conditions for the military to step in. But let me underline also one more fact, that the change in the understanding of the army, of the civilian government, of democracy, of the fact that democracy and secularism can go together under the control of a civilian government also, is not only changing within the army, it is a change in the general society. I am sitting in front of Taksim Square now. On my back you can see Taksim Square. Only 2 days ago there was a very important symbolic development here in Turkey. For the first time after 32 years, labor unions were permitted to come to the Taksim Square and celebrate the May Day, the International Workers' Day. This was prohibited by the emergency rule in Istanbul before the 1980 coup, and May Day celebrations were altogether outlawed by the military government after the coup d'etat. It took 29 years to get rid of those rules. So I am turning back. I'm still pessimistic. I'm still skeptical about the intentions of the government, of the military, but I will say there is a strengthening civil society in Turkey. It is not the government that is changing the facts on the ground, but the society.
Okay, Yusuf Kanlı, despite Mr. Bulgur's skepticism, he is optimistic and encouraged. Would you concur?
I have skepticism as well, but from a different perspective. I have worries regarding the advance of Islamic fundamentalism in the country. I have worries because of the latest government changes, which produced a more conservative or more Islamist, to my understanding, government. Whereas regarding the military, I am confident that in our society, no one wants a military coup. And in this age, even for a military coup, you need public support. The military is aware of this. The society is against interventions. Therefore, I don't see a threat of military intervention in politics. Whereas I do still feel scared of the possibility of an Islamist takeover one day in Turkey, which is.
But aren't there two extremes here? You've got sort of fear-mongering of this slippery slope towards a theocracy on the one hand, and on the other, Ergenekon and the sort of secular fundamentalism of wanting to get rid of religion in Turkey. Aren't you polarizing the argument here, whereas the truth is somewhere in between?
You are definitely right. I mean, secular fundamentalism is an equal threat as well. We have to find a balanced way out of this crisis. We have to be secular, we have to be democratic, and we have to respect the individual rights and liberties of people, including their rights to exercise their religion freely. But we have to find a way, we have to balance these all. And this will take some time. This is a transition period in Turkey. And I am hopeful that we'll end this transition without a road accident. I don't want the train crashed again, the toy train, and the father come and help us again. We are against that.
Fadi Hakura, is Turkey finding that balance at this moment in time?
I think that I'm less skeptical than Mr. Khan and Mr. Bulgur in terms of the balance between the military, civilian government and the Turkish public. I think what happened in Turkey, unfortunately, whenever the democracy was not allowed to mature, because every time an event happened, the military intervened, removed the government and installed a new constitution, etc. And this undermined the development of Turkish democracy. I think now that is changing. I think the Islamic threat is less of a threat. The problem in Turkey is that not many people trust the people to make the ultimate decision. Everyone is looking to the military or to the Turkish government, kind of a vertical mentality. And that I think is changing. The Turkey is becoming a more horizontal society. For example, in the last local elections, the government lost 9% of the vote, despite the fact that the majority of opinion in Turkey, of the analysts in Turkey, predicted the government would get 50%, but in fact they lost 9%. And post-election surveys indicated the government lost because of because of higher unemployment, the economic crisis, because of also the government's confrontational politics and corruption in the government. So I think the Turkish public is beginning to mature. Is beginning to discover the fact that they are the ultimate guarantors of democracy, of secularism in the country.
Well, as we've been discussing, this week has seen a move towards the military scaling back its influence on Turkish politics. The last 7 days has also seen Turkey's largest cabinet reshuffle since the AK Party came to power in 2005. Turkey's new foreign minister took office on the weekend. He wasted no time in declaring Turkey's intention to become a major player in international diplomacy.
Turkey is a big nation, and it will take its position among world nations. Turkey will no longer be a state full of crisis, but rather a state that is being consulted with and whose opinion is respected on all world issues, from global warming to the Middle East crisis.
Mr. Bulgur, no surprises that Turkey wants to become a major regional and global player?
It's not a surprise. It's actually the dream of every single Turk, be it religious or secular. Turks have ruled this region for 400, 500 years, and it is a kind of nostalgia in the mindset of the Turks to once more become not the Ottoman Empire, but at least influential in the global world. When it comes to Ahmet Davutoğlu, who is a professor of political science and international relations, he's not saying anything new. He is actually repeating what he wrote and said several times as a university professor, as an ideologue. Now he's saying the same things as the foreign minister of the country. We have to see that Ahmet Davutoğlu was already chief advisor of the prime minister on foreign policy issues, and for the last 1 year he was almost acting as the shadow foreign minister. His appointment didn't come as a surprise to any of us. He just became the guy who was behind the screens. He just came in front of the screen.
Okay, let's bring in Yusuf Khanlı. Yusuf, along these lines of Turkey wanting to be more of a regional power, wanting to be a peacemaker as well, you've got strengthening Turkish-Syrian ties. And very recently, General Başbuğ said he's not interested in Israel's concerns and fears over the Turkish-Syrian joint military maneuvers. What does that signify, I wonder?
Turkey, under Davutoğlu's approach, wants to play the role of a regional power. One element of it is, irrespective where a major social thing happens or individual major suffering happens, Turkey must be attentive to it, be it global epidemic, be it human rights violations that X country or so. Another one is Turkey is the former Ottoman Empire, has its sensitivities towards this region as well as its responsibilities. Therefore, is the natural peace maker, natural mediator, natural facilitator between groups and countries in this region. And the third element is, of course, Turkey is a member, Turkey is a country which is Black Sea, Caucasus, Middle East, a European, NATO, and such. Therefore, Turkey has to follow a diversified foreign policy. Cannot be always in line with the US, cannot be always in line with the EU, cannot be always in line with Russia.
Interesting point.
Must take all into consideration. And similarly, Turkey is the only country which has incredibly good relations, despite the recent Davos Tower and other problems in Israel, with Israel. At the same time, we are strong supporters of the Palestinian cause as well. In this area, we cannot let Israel dominate Turkey's foreign policy, or we cannot tune our approaches to satisfy the Israeli
expectations. But can that one size? I'm going to pose my final question. I'm going to pose my final question to Fadi Hakura. Can that sort of one-size-fits-all approach and keeping everybody happy approach really work? Surely at some stage you're going to marginalize some of your current allies.
In fact, it's actually we're beginning to see some problems with this approach. Turkey will have to make choices in foreign policy. A key example of this is Turkey's rapprochement with Armenia. The government has been releasing noises that they are getting closer relations with Armenia, but at the same time, then they got into problems with Azerbaijan. And now it seems the process of normalization between Turkey and Armenia has been somewhat frozen because of the objections from Azerbaijan, and also because of the territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So, and also we saw that also with the issue of Israel and Syria. There, Turkey or the Turkish government made a lot of publicity from this mediation between Israel and Syria, but now that's pretty much over. So Turkey will have to make choices, and I think the key choice for Turkey is the European Union accession process. It's the European Union accession process, economic modernization, social modernization, the entrenchment of democracy, which makes Turkey really stand out in the region. If Turkey wants to stand out, it will have to promote the EU accession process more and more.
Gentlemen, it's been an enlightening discussion. Yusuf Kanlı, Kareem Bulgur, and Fadi Hakura, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments, your suggestions, even your questions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye-bye for now.